Thank you, ladies, for that. Well, I tell you, I've been sitting up here trying to find God's will. And I was going to preach on God's will. I'm serious. But I feel like, well, we might get there. I don't know. But I think we need to go back to where we was at this morning. I don't know who this is for. But I haven't been able to get away from that message this morning. In 1 Kings 20. So if you would, just pray a quick prayer for me. Then follow the Lord this evening. I've got a message on understanding the will of the Lord. But if it's not the will of the Lord to preach that message, then I won't. I do want to say this. There's no greater life than being in the will of God. Amen. I pity the Christian that never learns to understand the will of the Lord. Amen. I pity the church member that spends their whole life looking for God's will instead of understanding it. Right. And I may get there in just a minute. But right now I want to go back and just talk about a couple things in this 1 Kings 20. And if you missed the message this morning, you missed it because I'm not going to re-preach it. We're just going to pick up right where we left off. But I have all day been thinking about that phrase where Ben-Hadad said to Ahab, I will send my servants unto thee tomorrow about this time. And they shall search thine house and the houses of thy servants. And it shall be that whatsoever is pleasant in thine eyes, they shall put it in their hand and take it away. I didn't even get into this morning because, just to be honest with you, I didn't have time to expound every single nugget in this passage. But I did think about this. There may be things in your life that are pleasant in your eyes, and you don't even know what they are. In other words, Ben-Hadad told Ahab, I'm going to be sending my messengers tomorrow about this time. And if they see something that's pleasant in your eyes, they're going to take it and put it in their hand and take it away. Ahab had advance notice. He could have taken whatever it was and hidden it. All right? He said, I'm going to send my messengers tomorrow about this time, and whatever's pleasant in your eyes, they're going to take it. And Ahab could have taken inventory before they got there and figured out what it was. But here's the point the Lord's been dealing with me about all day. I don't think a lot of people even know what it is until God goes to put his hand on it. And all of a sudden, in other words, this morning when I was preaching, maybe some of you thought, I wonder why Pastor Shiflett don't just elaborate a little bit on what some of those pleasant things are. And I didn't elaborate on them because I didn't have to. I'm confident that while I was preaching this morning, the Holy Spirit of God told you what it was. If I'd have started naming some of them, some of you would have said, he didn't name any of mine. Woo, I'm good to go. But hey, when he comes to you and he comes to your house and he searches through your house and starts looking through your life and he reaches over and puts his hand on it, you know that's what it is. You know. And Nathan and I were talking about this before lunch this afternoon when I got home from church. We were still talking about this passage of Scripture. And it's almost like God says, whatever it is in your life that you really, really want, that's what I really, really want. I don't want your rejects. I don't want the stuff you don't care about. I don't want the stuff that you can live without. I want what you want. Whatever it is that's precious and pleasant in your eyes, that's what I want. Here's our problem. We don't want him to have it. We don't want him to have it. We're afraid of what he's going to do when he gets it. I thought about this. They shall put it in their hand. Could you imagine what kind of Christian you and I would be if the most precious and priceless thing in our life, we put it in his hand? Imagine that. Imagine what kind of Christian you and I would be if in the innermost being of our soul, what it is that we're holding on to with a death grip, God was to reach over and put his hand on it. Imagine what we would be. But we know what we want, don't we? We don't mind God having some of it. But we know what we want. And when we figure out what it is we want, we do not want him to have it. See, I didn't finish the story this morning. In 1993, when I was at Resaca, Georgia, at Faith Baptist Camp, and Sam Davison was preaching from this passage of Scripture, I had said over and over and over again, God, I'll do anything you want me to do except preach. And in my mind, I was surrendered. God, I'll do whatever you want me to do except preach. Guess what it was God wanted me to do? He wanted that one thing that was precious in my eyes. That's what he wanted. He wasn't impressed by the 98% I was giving him. He wanted the 2% I was holding on to. And I have thought about it, I don't know how many times, what kind of life I would have lived if I had not given him that small portion that I did not want him to have. Where would I be right now? Who would I be married to? I didn't know this at the time, but my wife had already told the Lord she couldn't surrender to preach because she was a woman. But she said, Lord, if you want me to, I'll marry a preacher. She had surrendered to marry a preacher. Needless to say, if I hadn't surrendered to preach, I wouldn't be married to her. I don't even want to know what kind of life I would be living right now if I had not surrendered to preach. I don't even want to think about, Lord have mercy, I don't even want to think about how many people would be in hell right now if I had not surrendered to preach. I don't even want to think about how many marriages would have ended in divorce court, but because I surrendered to preach and God allowed me to insert myself into someone's life, God used me as a servant and as a tool in his hand to help salvage somebody's marriage. I can't even imagine my life if for the last 25 years I'd been living it for myself rather than in the ministry. But see, the one thing I said to God, I'll do whatever you want me to do, just like Ahab did. I'm thine and all that I have is thine. And God said, well, I'm going to come through and I'm going to look at what's pleasant in your eyes and I'm going to put my hand on it and I'm going to take it. And I'm so thankful to God in July 1993 that when God came through my heart and put his hand on that one little specific area of my life that I had put up that no trespassing sign, I'm thankful that I said, you can have it. I will never forget it as long as I live. I sat there that day, and that preacher was preaching, had no idea who all was there. He had no idea who all was fighting with God and fighting with the will of God. And I got up out of my seat, and I came down and I knelt at the altar during the invitation. And I remember as they began to play the invitation, I bowed my head, and I said, God, if you want me to preach, I'll preach. You just got to make it clear to me. I knew exactly what he wanted. It's funny, though. We're creatures of habit. We're hard-headed. And we surrender. And then when he's not looking, we rope off another corner and put up another no trespassing sign. And I remember that I went to Bible college and I began to train for the ministry. And my brother-in-law and I, we went in business together. And God was blessing our business. By the way, I've shared this part of the story with you. Little did I know that while I was over here on this side of the sanctuary praying in the altar after that message by Brother Sam Davison on surrender out of this passage, on the opposite side of the tabernacle, kneeling over there by the piano, was another young man a year younger than me named David Young. My wife's brother, and we weren't dating at the time. But both of us went to the altar at the same time from the same message. We both wrestled with God for several weeks, and I announced my call to preach on a Saturday, July the 10th. He announced his call to preach on Sunday morning at his church, July the 11th. Amen. And we both went to the altar at the same time, in the same place, from the same message, from this passage right here. I thought, I wonder how many people, if me and Brother David had not surrendered to preach that day, how many people would that have affected? There's no way. Only eternity will know. And Brother Sam never knew. Brother Sam never knew. He never knew. And I bumped into him, 6, 8 years ago. When I was out in Lancaster, California, leadership conference. He was there preaching. And I walked down the front and stood in line to shake his hand. And when I shook his hand, I said, you don't know me. But in June of 1993, you preached a message on surrender at Faith Baptist Camp in Resaca, Georgia. And I went to the altar, and God used that message to call me to preach. I said, I was a missionary in Africa for almost 6 years. I've been pastoring all these years. And I said, you'll never know. God used you that day. And he stood there and wept. And I said, another young man that I know of surrendered to preach that day. Now he's pastoring. He's in the ministry. I said, 2 young men were called to preach that God's had his hand on all these years. You didn't even know it. He stood there and wept. He said, I can't believe I'm hearing this. Of course, since then, God's allowed Brother Sam and I to become close, and he's preached here, and you got to meet him. I began to think about what would my life have been like. Who would I be married to? Would I even still be alive? Would I even be in church? What would my family look like if I had kept up that no trespassing sign and said, I'll do whatever you want me to do, God, except preach? And God said, I want you to preach. If I'd have said, no, I'm not preaching. And it is my personal belief as a pastor. I've pastored Baptists for years. And I'm going to tell you why so many families crash and burn. People get out of church. People get bitter. People get sideways with God. They get out of the will of God. I'm going to tell you why. Somewhere along the way, God came through their life, found what was pleasant in their eyes, and he put his hand on it, and they said, I don't think so. And their life took a turn God never intended for it to take. They look back and they want to blame other people. They want to blame experiences at church. Well, I got hurt at church. Join the club. My soul, I've been hurt more at church than I have anywhere else in the whole world put together. The worst hurt I've ever been through in my life has been at church. Well, preacher, how come you're still here? Because I'm in the will of God. That's how come I'm still here. I surrendered. I waved the white flag and I said, I'm not going to fight with the God of heaven anymore. You can have my life. You can take it. Fast forward, I'm in Bible college. First year we were in business. My wife and I decided to take a random vacation out to Charleston, South Carolina. It's a beautiful part of the country. Not really much to do out there, but when we go on vacation, we don't really do much. We just like to relax. So we loaded up and went to the Charleston area. We were out there, found a nice motel, and we just lounging around, being lazy, eating out, and sleeping. That's what we do on vacation. These people go to all these theme parks. I'm happy for you. I ain't doing all that. I'm doing nothing on vacation, nothing. But we went to church on Wednesday night. We loaded up and went to Brother Alfred Willis's church on Wednesday night. It was about probably an hour and a half, maybe even 2 hour drive from where we were staying. But we loaded up that we wanted to go to a good church because we always go to church when we're on vacation. We don't ever take a vacation from church. Even on vacation, we go to church. I was telling Nathan and the rest of this morning, I preached on my honeymoon. We got married on a Saturday and drove 5 hours to Valdosta, Georgia, from Augusta, Georgia. Got to the motel about 11:30 that night, and we was in Sunday school next morning. I was preaching at 10:15 on my honeymoon. I don't know who needed that, but I just thought I'd throw that out. So Nathan, if you're really called of God, you will find somewhere to preach on your honeymoon, all right? Anyway, we went on vacation, and we drove a couple hours to Brother Alfred Willis's Life Baptist Church out in the middle of nowhere in South Carolina. Walked in that church on Wednesday night, great service. They was talking to us after the service. They said, "Are y'all going to the missions conference down in Walterboro?" I said, "No, man, we're on vacation. We're on vacation. I'm not going to a missions conference." They said, "Well, man, they're putting everybody up in a motel and they're feeding them 3 meals a day." I said, "Sounds like a good vacation to me." You think I'm kidding? I'm not kidding. We loaded up the next day and went to the missions conference. We're sitting in the service. And there's a missionary there from South Africa and got up to preach. He made a statement. That stuck in my craw. Stuck in my craw so bad. He said, "I'm going to tell you right now why young people, young couples are not surrendering to go to the mission field. They're afraid they're going to get over there and die. They're afraid they're going to go over there and get killed." Now, that's a pretty odd thing to say, especially when you live in Baltimore and you can get killed coming home from work. Amen. Yeah. But I mean, just think about it a minute. That's what he said. People are afraid to go to the mission field. They're afraid they're going to go over there and die or get killed or get some kind of disease or something. And I thought to myself, is that really why people aren't going? And we left that missions conference that week, and I remember driving back home, and I said to my wife, I said, "God did something in my heart this week. I don't know exactly what it was, but he did something. And I won't be surprised if it don't end up being something important before it's over with." First year Bible college, Brother Gene, first year Bible college. That was in the back of my mind the whole time I was in Bible Institute. That missions conference, that missionary saying that. And then I took my surrender to a whole nother level. I said, "Lord, I'll do whatever you want me to do except pastor." I said, "I'll be a missionary to Africa if that's what you want me to be." No, I'm serious. "I'll be a missionary to Africa if that's what you want me to be. I'll be an evangelist. I'll do whatever you want me to do, but I do not want to pastor." Because I learned at an early age that pastors get fired if they do their job right. I learned at an early age that a pastor can get kicked off the job for doing his job. I watched my daddy get voted out of a church when I was a little boy. The boy put a bad taste in my mouth. I mean, I'm talking about a bitter taste in my mouth. When I saw the men in that church rise up against my daddy, and all he was doing was preaching the Bible and trying to enforce the bylaws and constitution of the church, and they didn't want it. And I said, "I don't want a pastor. Lord, I'll do whatever you want me to do." And I thought that was so noble. I'll do whatever you want me to do, but I don't want a pastor. But I remember as my Bible college days began to draw close, I realized just how selfish and self-centered I was. And I got on my knees one day. I said, Lord, if you want me to pastor, I'll pastor. If that's what you want me to do, that's what I'll do. And God said, good, I'm glad we got that squared away. Now I want you to be a missionary to Africa. I'm not making this up. See, that was precious in my eyes. And I didn't want him to have that. Little did I know that I could never be a missionary in Africa if I wasn't willing to be a pastor. Because when I started leading people to the Lord, guess what I became? When I started that church there with those little group of new converts, guess what I became? I became a pastor. And I had to come to grips with the fact that you never ever tell God, I'll do whatever you want me to do, except. That's not surrender. And so, if I could just say this, I learned my lesson. I stopped telling God what I wasn't going to do. I stopped telling God where I wouldn't go. I went to Africa thinking I'd be there for the rest of my life. I never dreamed God would pull me off of the mission field and put me back in Greenville, South Carolina, the buckle of the Bible Belt. I mean, when you just think about it for just a minute, I mean, people are not knocking down doors to go to Africa, and we were there and loving it. My wife was loving it. I was loving it. Our kids, we were loving it. God had his hand on us. People were being saved. God was using us in amazing ways. I was as happy as a hog in slop. And God literally began to turn off the faucet. I don't know any other way to say it, but my waking up every morning with a zeal and a fire and a passion. And that was back when I was a young man, and I had about 4 times the energy that I've got right now, and I was from 7 o'clock in the morning till 11 o'clock at night, 7 days a week, burning the candle at both ends, absolutely loving it. And I began to get premonitions, talking about the will of God. If you need a Bible verse, it's Ephesians 5:17. Be ye not there unwise, but understanding what the will of the Lord is. God has a will for your life. Right. And God wants you to know his will for your life way more than you want to know it.
That's right.
Most people just don't want to know.
Amen.
Most people's got the ringer off.
Yes, sir. Right.
Huh? You say, God never speaks to me. Is your ringer on? He talks to me all the time.
Amen.
He's blowing my phone up. And I remember I gathered all of my men. We had men's prayer meeting every Saturday morning at 7 o'clock at our church in South Africa. Every Saturday morning at 7 o'clock, all the men in my church come to my house. We'd have coffee, and we'd gather around, and we would pray. And I mean, we'd pray for an hour. We have our men's prayer breakfast here, and I'm thankful for the men coming. Some of y'all pray about 30 seconds, and then you're done. We pray for an hour. And I mean, we just get out on our hands and knees, and we just pray and pray and pray. We did that every Saturday at my house. And one Saturday, I told all those men, I said, I believe God's about done with me here. I have no idea where and when and how, but it could be 6 weeks, it could be 6 months, but I feel like I've taken this church as far as I can as an American. It's time for you men to step up to the plate and take this church and go forward with it. I feel like at some point God's going to move me. And we were all in unison about that. I remember I had a printing ministry out in the garage. Had printing equipment, had a risograph, had some cutters, had some folders, had some long arm staplers. And I'd be writing these little pamphlets and tracts and things and little booklets, and I'd be up till sometimes many nights, midnight, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, writing these books and getting them laid out. and getting the pages and everything right. And then I'd get up in the next morning, I'd go out there and I'd print 500 copies of every single page. And then I'd do the collating and the stapling and build these little books together and put the little covers on them. And I'd go out and pass them out in the street. I mean, just always doing something. And my whole garage was about half of it was a print shop. I had boxes of paper that our home church had sent us, and I would just grab a ream of paper, put it in that risograph, and change the drums out from blue to red to whatever, and was just printing. And I was in there one day, and I was listening to a preaching tape. I found a preaching tape in a box of tapes. That's how long ago it was. It was a tape. And I found this tape of me preaching at Pleasant View Baptist Church in Taylor, South Carolina, when I was home on furlough. And I grabbed that tape, and I popped it in the tape player, and I started listening to it while I was working in the print shop. And something come over me. I don't know how to explain it. Just something came over me. And I remember walking in the house. I told my wife, I said, well, I sure would love to preach at Pleasant View again. I'd only preached there a couple times as a missionary on furlough. And I looked at my wife, and the most random question that you can imagine came out of my mouth as I'm sitting in the house in Bloemfontein, South Africa, happy as I can be in the will of God. I looked at my wife and I said, how would you like to live in Greenville, South Carolina? I asked her about it today. She distinctly remembers me asking her that question. I don't even remember her answer. What'd you say? You didn't answer. I just asked her, I said, how would you like to live in Greenville, South Carolina? She didn't answer. It was just a completely out of context. There was no rhyme or reason for that question. A couple days later, I was in the print shop, and as clear as a bell, the Holy Spirit of God said to me, shut this print shop down. Now, you got to understand, I loved it. I loved it. I'm talking about when the Holy Spirit comes in your heart, in your life, and He reaches over and puts His hand on something, and you either can give Him a thumbs up or a thumbs down. You can either say, Lord, it's yours, do whatever you want to do, or you can fight with Him. And I just learned a long time ago, you don't win when you fight with Him. And clear as a bell, the Lord said, shut it down. And I remember taking that printing equipment, the tabletop folder, and the long arm staplers, and the collating machine, all of that stuff. I took it all over there and put it on one table, and I took in sheets, and I covered it all up in the corner of my garage, and I put all the boxes away, and I cleared my garage out, and I walked out the door. I had no idea what was going on. I just knew God said, shut it down. That was a Thursday or a Friday. On Saturday, one of us opened up the gate. We had those motorized gates in South Africa, 8-foot walls all the way around our yard with razor wire, serpentine wire. Crime over there so bad. You just felt like you lived in a prison all the time. So we had those high walls with serpentine wire and razor wire. And we had these gates, and you hit the remote, and your gate would open up, and you'd pull in your yard, hit the remote, and it would shut behind you. And somehow, some way, for some reason, one of us hit the remote, the gate opened up, and our big dog looked like it's a it's a South African breed of dog called a Boer Bull. Looks like a big bull mastiff that we had raised from a puppy. That was our guard dog. You have to have those in Africa. She ran out the gate and ran out and hit a car. The car didn't hit her. She hit the car. She ran into the side of it. And it tore her up. Shoulder was busted, her face, jaw broke, busted. I mean, she was tore up. I loaded her up in my truck. I took her to the vet, walked in there, and the vet said, I can't help her. I said, if it was your dog, what would you do? He said, I put her down. I said, go ahead. And I walked around behind that vet, and I cried like a girl. That was on Saturday. Monday afternoon, I got an email from the pastor's daughter in South Carolina of Pleasant View Baptist Church. She said, Daddy wants to talk to you. He don't know how to call you because he don't know how to do that code, the international code on the phone. And so I checked my email on Tuesday morning. It was early and it was cold. They don't have heat in the houses in South Africa. It was probably in the 40s in our house every morning in the wintertime. Now, when the sun come out, it'd be nice and beautiful. But at night, the sun went down, it'd be cold. You could see your breath sometimes. And I remember getting up and going into the living room, picked up the phone, and I called that preacher, and I said, hey, I got an email that said you want to talk to me. He was one of my supporting churches. I thought maybe I'd said something or done something he didn't like, and I thought he was going to fuss at me about it. He said, I'd resign my church Sunday night. I'm calling to see if you'd be willing to come take this church. I'm talking about the will of God. I'm talking about being completely surrendered. I'm talking about being so dialed in to what God wants that he don't have to holler to get your attention. As a matter of fact, I was so sure God was moving us from South Africa that laying on my desk when I was talking to that pastor was a ticket, an airline ticket to Ghana, West Africa. I had already been there once before, 2 years before, preached 21 times in 14 days, and that missionary called me. He said, I've got 8 churches right now without a national pastor. I need help training national preachers. And as bad as I hated Ghana when I was there, when I say I hated it, I mean it's the armpit of the world. If you've never been to Ghana, West Africa, it's a third world. I mean, it's the air stinks. It's just nasty. I could tell you stories about Ghana, but I was so surrendered to do whatever God wanted me to do, Brother Frank, that I had bought a ticket to go to Ghana thinking maybe God's moving me up there. It was on my desk, that ticket to go to Ghana, when this pastor, in essence, called me. I called him, but he reached out to me, and I picked that phone up, and he said, I resigned my church. I retired after 33 and a half years. I retired Sunday night, and I wonder if you would be willing to come and take this church. And I can't explain it to you. I wouldn't even try to explain it to you. It was like God flipped a switch in my soul. And I said, why are you calling me? You know hundreds of preachers. I'm over here on the other side of the planet. Out of sight, out of mind, they say. I don't think so. I might have been out of his sight, but God knew where I was. He said, I'm not going down a list. I've been praying about you for 6 months, and I believe God wants you to come take my church. And if I recommend you to my church, they'll vote you in. I said, well, let's find out. Go ahead and put it to the vote. And I hung the phone up. My wife was standing there. I'll never forget that picture of my wife standing there. She's hearing one side of this conversation, but she knows what's happening. She's standing there with her house coat on, and she's going. You got to understand, God, this is not just a little detour. This is a complete taking your whole life and doing this with it. And we loved our church. We loved those people over there. We had built relationships with them. They were growing leaps and bounds. They were at our house literally every day. At our house. Somebody was knocking on our door at 7 o'clock in the morning every single day. I'm like, go to the door. What is it? We want to know if we can borrow a book. They had all my books in my living room. And they would come in there and look for a book and sit down in my living room and pretend to read all day long and watch us. Watch us. And watch me and my wife interact, and watch us interact with our children, and watch our children, us dealing with them and disciplining them and all these things, and just living our life. And they would sit there under the pretenses of reading their book or whatever, and there was somebody at our house literally every day the last 5 months we were on the field. I mean, we didn't eat a meal by ourselves hardly. They were there for lunch. They were there for supper. Our house was just like, it was just coming and going, people in there all the time. We loved it. I mean, loved it. And my wife's going. I put the phone down. I picked it right back up, and I dialed 1-706-556-9462. That's my father-in-law, who was my pastor. He answered the phone. I said, Doc, you ain't going to believe this. He said, what? I said, I just got a phone call from the pastor of Pleasant View Baptist Church in Taylor, South Carolina. He wanted to know if he could put my name in that church. And I don't know how to tell you this, but I believe it's the will of God. He said, I know it's the will of God. I said, how do you know that? He said, I just talked to him yesterday. I said, what do you mean you talked to him? He said, well, I heard that he retired Sunday night, and I drove 3 hours to his house to try to talk him out of it on Monday. And they wasn't even close. They didn't even hardly know one another. My father-in-law drove all the way to Taylor, South Carolina, and pulled up in the yard, and that preacher's out there, and he was working on something in his yard, and my father-in-law said, you need to take the church back. You don't need men like you don't need to be retiring. You need to be fired. You need to stay in the ministry. There's too much to do. And that pastor said, God told me to step down. God told me to resign, and that's what I'm going to do. It's done. And my father-in-law looked at him and said, okay, well, if I can't talk you out of it, I guess I'll just quit. And the pastor said, well, I'm glad you're here because I need to talk to you. He said, what are you talking to me about? He said, I want to talk to you about your son-in-law. He said, because I believe God wants him to come take this church. What do you think? And my father-in-law, who has very little good to say about me, said to that preacher, he said, I believe if anybody come in behind you and make it work, it'd be him. He said, can I call him? He said, yeah. So he called, talked to my father-in-law, my pastor, on Monday, and then emailed me that Monday night, and I'm talking to him on Tuesday morning, and so I'm telling all this to my father-in-law, he already knows. And I said, I don't know how to explain this to you, Doc. I said, but I got peace about it. He said, I got peace about it too. I said, what should I do? I'll tell you what he said. He said, you go pray and tell Grace to pack. And you just know my father-in-law, he wasn't saying that because he wanted to see his grandkids. He wasn't saying that because he wanted his daughter off the field. He knows better than that. And I'm going along here. I started bringing the people of my church in. I started calling them. I started calling the people of my church on that Tuesday to come to my house. Now, they were only going to vote on me on Wednesday night at Pleasant View. I told everybody in my church on Tuesday I was going to Pleasant View, and they hadn't even voted on me yet. You say, how's that possible? I don't know. Understanding the will of the Lord, maybe. It's not that complicated if you're surrendered.
Yeah. Amen.
They voted us in unanimously on that Wednesday night. And they only had one question. Pulpit committee had one question. How quick can you get here? And I said, well, I am in Africa. I mean, logistically, just think this through. Would you believe it if I told you that the preacher boy that I'd been training in the Bible Institute was groomed and ready? I brought him before the church. They voted him in 100% unanimously as the new pastor. We found somebody to take over the lease on the house we were renting. We sold all of our furniture, and we were out of South Africa and in South Carolina in 2 weeks. God literally snatched me up out of Bloemfontein, South Africa, as happy as a man could be. I mean, as plugged in as you can get. And just stuck me right in Greenville, South Carolina. I don't want to say it was against my will, because that wouldn't have been, my will didn't matter anymore. I literally didn't have a will. I didn't care. I just wanted to be where God wanted me. I don't know how long I've been preaching. I was in Greenville, South Carolina for 8 years. 8 years. 8 years. That church treated me good, treated my family. We treated us like royalty. We had a beautiful house, beautiful place out in the country. Y'all have heard me tell it. 3,600 square foot log cabin on 4 acres with horse pastures and barns. And man, we were just, and we had company. Our church came over every Sunday night after church. Every Sunday night after church, our church came over. Whole church. It was an open invitation, the whole church. Everybody just come over Sunday night after church. We'd have sometimes 75, 80 people in our house on Sunday night. We did that for 8 years. And just loved our people and was loving life. And I can't explain it. But in the early summer of 2014, I felt God turning that water faucet off again. I felt it drying up in my soul. I thought it was me. I went online and I registered for the pastor's clinic out at Heartland Baptist Bible College. I registered for that, a refreshers course. I'm thinking, man, I'm not right. I'm losing my burden for this church. I'm losing my vision for this church. I went online. I signed up for that. I went and signed up at Crown College for their pastor's college. I signed up for that. Man, I'm thinking, I've got to get some help. Lord, I can't pastor these people feeling this way. I remember flying out to Oklahoma, and I'm sitting there on the front table. Brother Sam Davison standing there talking about the will of God and loving your people and knowing God's will. I'm sitting on the front row taking notes. I'm going, what is this all about? I had a revival scheduled the next week at our church with Brother Buster Mullins from Chilhowie, Virginia. And I remember I was walking across the campus there at Heartland, and Brother Buster Mullins called me, and he said, Brother Shiflett, I hate to tell you this, but I have been sick as a dog for 6 weeks. I've lost 20-something pounds. There is no way I can make it to your meeting. I put it off as long as I could, thinking I'd get better, but I cannot make it to your meeting. I'm so sorry. I've been looking forward to coming, but I'm sick. I said, brother, it's okay. It happens. I was disappointed because I really wanted our people to hear Brother Mullins. Well, I wish I could get him up here. He's got bad health, but you're talking about a preacher. And I said, man, that's all right. That's fine. I hung up the phone. I started praying. I started thinking, Lord, who can I get to come and preach the revival at short notice? And I thought about a retired evangelist, Brother Dr. Ray Bearden. I called Brother Bearden. I said, Brother Bearden, can you come? He's preached for me several times. White-headed man. I mean, just anointed ministry. And I said, can you come? Short notice, can you come and you can preach? So he said, let me call you right back. I said, if I can make it work. He called me back 30 minutes later. He said, my wife's an invalid. I don't have anybody to stay with her. I can't leave her. There's no way it's going to work out. Just go ahead and get somebody else. I can't make it happen. And I'm thinking to myself, man, God, I'm wanting a revival at my church, and I can't get a preacher. I thought for a few minutes, and I thought about my brother-in-law. I thought, well, David will come preach. Of course, he's pastoring. So I called David. I said, look, I got a revival scheduled for Sunday morning through Wednesday night. I'll preach Sunday if you'll come preach Monday and Tuesday, and I'll just preach Wednesday so you don't have to miss your church. He said, I'll come. So I got up on Sunday morning at my church, and I told my church, I said, God's wanting to do something in this church, and God's wanting to do something in my life. And I don't know what it is, but I know God's wanting to do something. He's wanting to do something important. And it's so important to me that I'm going to fast till this revival's over with. I'm going to fast all the way till after church Sunday, Wednesday night. And I'm going to ask God to please show me His will. He can tell you, He was there. And I preached Sunday morning, I preached Sunday night, preached my own revival. David Young came in, preached Monday night, preached Tuesday night. I got up on Wednesday night, turned to Mark chapter number 1, and I started preaching about the open door. When God puts an open door in front of you, you better go through it before He shuts the door. And I stood in front of my people on that Wednesday night, and I said, church, I'm telling you right now, if God opens a door in front of me, I'm walking through it. I don't care what it is. That was on Wednesday night. Friday night, we had what we call teen turnout. We had probably 100-something teenagers at our church from other churches and all of our teens. And we had preaching, and we had volleyball outside and watermelon and all this, a lot of different activities. They all spent the night, stayed the night in the dorms. We had dormitories. They spent the night. Saturday morning, got up, had another preaching service, went to the park, played softball, and we called it teen turnout, kind of a double meaning. We want all the teens to turn out for the youth conference, but we wanted our teens to turn out for God, kind of a double meaning. They're still doing that, by the way, down at Pleasant View. Every year they do that teen turnout. And that Friday night, after the service, our kids were outside playing volleyball under the lights. And I was sitting inside that sanctuary with my wife and Brother Stephen Williamson and his wife. And I said to him, I said, I can't take it no more. He said, what? I said, I don't know. Something's got to give. I can't take it. Something's got to change. I don't know what it is. I just know I can't take this no more. That was on Friday night. Saturday morning, service, went to the park, played softball, cooked out, had a devotion, all that stuff, packed everything up, cleaned everything up. We went home. We had several preachers' kids from Georgia staying with us. We got to the house about, 3 or 4 o'clock on that Saturday afternoon. We're sitting at the table, and my phone rings. Former pastor of this church says, I'm going to resign tomorrow morning. Can I put your name in? Deja vu all over again. The same thing that happened in South Africa happened that day. I said, I'm not looking to go anywhere. You do whatever God tells you to do. When I said that, my wife and Marissa looked at me from across the table like, what in the world is happening? I hung the phone up. I said, well, my wife can remember it probably better than me. It was a blur. We just immediately started just talking. I said, God might be going to be moving us to Baltimore. Picked the phone up about an hour later. I called him back. I said, let me ask you a question. He said, what? I said, why'd you call me? I said, you know hundreds of preachers. You only met me one time. I came up 8 months prior and was here for the prayer conference with Brother Beckham. I said, why'd you call me? He said, because the Spirit of God's on you, boy. And that church needs a pastor that's got the Spirit of God on them. I said, I think every church needs a pastor with the Spirit of God on them. Wouldn't you think that? That was Saturday afternoon about 5 o'clock, Brother Replogle, and that thing got to eating at me. And that thing settled in on me, and I knew without a shadow of a doubt God was moving me up here. I was so sure that I called that man right there and Anthony Simmons. I said, meet me at the church at 9 o'clock Saturday night. I drove 15 minutes to Pleasant View Baptist Church. I walked in the back door, and they were already sitting on the back row. I walked in, they said, what is it? I said, I might as well just go ahead and tell y'all. God's fixing to move me to Baltimore. And what I said, that was before the man even resigned. You said, what are you talking about? I'm talking about when you're surrendered. And he walks in your life, and he puts his hand on something that's very precious to you, and very priceless to you, and very pleasant to you. You can either tell him to take it, or you can go to war with him over it. I didn't mean to go into all that. Ephesians 5:17, wherefore be ye not unwise, but understanding what the will of the Lord is. I'm going to say this and I'm done. And I'll save this and preach this later. You'll never know God's will for your life because he will never tell you his will for your life until you're surrendered.
Right. Amen.
He don't tell you what he wants to do to see if you're going to surrender or not. You got to be surrendered before he will ever reveal it to you. I believe that with all of my heart. Now you can argue with me if you want to. I don't care. But I know this. The will of God for my life has never been complicated and drawn out. It's always been crystal clear. And God told me one time. You say, well, he don't do that to me. It might be because you're not surrendered. I was never in the military. I'd have loved to have been in the military. Many of you were. We were talking about it before church down here with John. I said, I believe I'd have been a good Marine. But I can tell you this, when you get orders from headquarters, you don't get to stand there with them and debate it.
Right. Amen.
They established that at boot camp.
Amen.
You're ours. You belong to us. You go where we tell you to go. You do what we tell you to do. When you're surrendered to God and he says, here's what I want you to do, you don't argue with him. You just do it. Imagine if I had not surrendered to preach. Imagine if I had not surrendered to go to the mission field. I don't even want to think about what my life would be like and how many people God would have not allowed me to be a blessing to and lives to touch. And my question to you tonight is this. You won't know either. You won't never know what God can do with you, what God will do with you if you just surrender. And when he puts his hand on it, say, go ahead, take it, it's yours. You're my Lord and you're my King. That's what Ahab kept telling Benadad, but he didn't mean it. Lord, just take my life. Whatever you can do with it, it's yours. Here, take it. I'm asking you tonight, I'm done, heads bowed, eyes closed. Are you surrendered? Are you really in a position